Let's just start with a timestamp here. The time is 6:07, and let's do just a roll call attendance. Francine Lyons.
Francine Lyons here.
Thank you. Corey Evans.
Corey Evans here.
Michael Dick. Mike, you're on mute.
I'm also off. I just said hello to my wife, whom I haven't seen in 4 days, and I'm here.
I apologize for the bad timing of this of this committee meeting. It sounds like we should really keep it on time tonight. Susan Franklin.
Susan Franklin here.
Great, and Brian Host here. So with that, let's jump in. We have as a primary item in the agenda.
Excuse me, Ralph just joined.
Great. So Ralph, we just took roll call attendance. So Ralph Dormitzer?
Yep, attending.
Okay.
Yep.
That's an aye. Okay, so we've got everyone here. Now, Francine, you're sitting secretary, as I understand it. Are you able to take minutes this evening?
I can, yes.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure we have someone doing that. And we're going to dive right into town hall. There are 4 items on the agenda with regards to the space issue facing the town on town hall. We've got the proposed lease at 1 Pleasant Street for the first floor. We have another proposal that came in response to the RFP for temporary space. I know there's also been discussion with regards to potential repairs at 41 Highland, as well as a potential new build opportunity on the back of the parking lot at 41 Highland. These are on the agenda. I put these on the agenda because and hopefully others agree that we want to be courteous with regards to these as topics of discussion. But I do want to be clear; these are non-responsive to the RFP that the select board chose to put out and receive proposals for. So while we will touch on these, I think it's important that we focus on the item at hand, which is the proposals that have been received, and one of which being 1 Pleasant that the select board has already voted to enter into negotiations on. So why don't we jump in? And Michelle, if I could just ask you to lead with a summary of the proposal, and then we can open it to questions by the committee. And then,
Ralph, I'm sorry, Brian.
That's 1 second.
I have an objection here.
I understood.
Ralph
I'll
and I
circle back
have
to you
been
in a
working
moment.
over these last several weeks.
Michael, I understood. I'll circle back to you in a moment. What I'd like to suggest
reviews and analyses and talking with. I'm sorry,
Michael?
Brian, you're breaking up. I can't hear you.
Okay. Can anyone else hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
No,
what I'd like to suggest is we hit these one at a time and try and keep them as compartmentalized as possible so that this does not become a blender with a bunch of ingredients in it. I don't suggest we vote on any of these until we've gone through all of them. But that would be my suggestion. If others have views, I'm interested in hearing them. Otherwise, let's go ahead.
Well, I do have views. I don't know if anyone else does as well.
Please proceed.
Okay. Before Michelle begins, I would like to raise a number of concerns that I certainly have, and I believe Ralph shares, based on our research and discussions with subject matter experts, architects, over these last 2 months. So before we go ahead and listen to Michelle's proposals, that the rest of the Capital Budget Committee get up to speed with what Ralph and I have discovered. We feel that the approach to 1 Pleasant Street is being pushed through without due diligence. There have been a number of statements and positions taken by the select board, and I'm not sure if it's by the town manager as well, but certainly by the select board, that Ralph and I certainly feel that are self-serving. And so before we proceed with a review of these proposals that Michelle's brought, that the rest of the committee hear some of Ralph and my concerns.
Okay,
So that's my proposal.
Okay, thank you for that, Michael. Two questions for the other members of the committee. Has everyone on this committee spent time watching the select board discussions and hence feel like they're relatively up to speed on these issues, which might enable Michael and Ralph to, perhaps be more succinct with regards to their objections? Or is there anyone on this call that feels like they're not up to speed that really needs, sort of a full understanding or a more thorough explanation of the objections that, certainly have been in the mix now for several weeks? I just poll people so that Michael and Ralph can tailor their comments appropriately. That's question one. And the question two is, if you disagree with Michael's proposal, now's the time to speak. Otherwise, I do intend to let he and Ralph share their views. We're not going to spend all night on this, but I do want to be courteous to have them have an opportunity to air their views, unless there are objections from other members of the committee. So two questions, and I'll start with you, Corey. You're at the top. I just want to hear how you want to handle this.
Well, if I'm going to think about all these things, I think we all could benefit from context. And context begins with, I think, the proposal that is coming from the select board, and then we can get into all the other things. I like that as a starting point because Mike and Ralph, you are so far down the road here that you may say stuff that I don't yet fully understand. And I'd rather kind of have the proposal. I've watched the meetings, but I do want to hear the proposal that sits now. And then we can kind of go through it from there. If we go reverse, I think I'm just going to end up in spaghetti. So I prefer to hear from the town what the proposals are in front of us. And then we can start going through what we think is a problem, what's a good thing, what's a not thing. That just would flow better for me.
Francine,
okay, that's
what
fair.
are your thoughts?
So I think I'm on the same page as Corey, and I have had a chance to look at the videos of the meetings, the recordings of the meetings, rather. I have not had a chance to go through all the materials that are on OneDrive. I do have access to them, but I have not had a chance to go through the materials themselves. And I too would rather, Michelle, even if it's just a refresher, to sort of walk through some of these before I think this goes sideways.
Okay. Susan?
I agree. I have gone through all the materials on OneDrive, thanks to Corey, putting me in the right direction. And I've only watched one of the select board meetings, and that was the last one. So I too would benefit from hearing the proposals presented by the town.
Okay. And I personally have watched two of the select board meetings and attended one. There was so I watched the first one when this fire code issue was brought to light, which I believe was back somewhere in December. I missed one in early January. I saw one in the middle of January, and then I attended one, just I think about a week ago. So I have a high level understanding, but Michael and Ralph, we definitely want to hear your details on this. But it sounds like people want to hear the proposals first. So I'd like to suggest that we proceed with that. So Michelle, if you could please move on to One Pleasant. We'll start there. And again, we're not going to vote on any of this until we really had a thorough conversation. So Michael, Ralph, we will cover these points. But Michelle, if you could bring us up to speed with a summary of One Pleasant, that would be helpful.
Sure, thanks. So I'm just going to rewind a little bit as to how we got to One Pleasant in 380 CJC. So we were looking for temporary space for all town hall employees based on the original letter that was written that stated that we should unoccupy town hall and find additional space. We issued an RFP. We received 2 responses that were responsive to the RFP that was issued. and they were 380 CJC and 1 Pleasant Street. I'll start with 1 Pleasant Street. The RFP asked for pricing on a 5-year lease with an option to purchase. Both RFPs came back. 1 Pleasant offered a 5-year temporary lease term with an option to purchase in year 1, and then a first right of refusal in years 2 through 4. CJC offered just a temporary lease price for 5 years. So,
Michelle, do you
yeah.
mind just stepping back 1 second and just go
Yeah.
1 step backwards and just rephrase, if you would, for me, the context for which the RFP was sent out, just
Yep.
what the decision point there and the reasons why, just to get the narrative end to end.
Yep. So we sent out an RFP based on a select board meeting. I believe it was in late December. There was a code compliance problem with the historic portion of Town Hall, that led to an entire, because the building is considered to be one building, the code compliance issue was across the entire building. The letter was issued stating that it should not be occupied due to fire suppression. So therefore an RFP was sent out to see if we could find temporary space for all town hall employees. During that time, Corey, I will say we also had a meeting with Glenn Pratt, and we worked through like the emergency management plan, if we could house people in other buildings in town without the need to rent space. It was determined at that time that we did need space because it's not an emergency situation similar to, you know, a weather event or something catastrophic happening where those other offices would be closed down. So therefore, if we were to take the space we would normally take in an emergency event, we would limit services in all of those other areas. And it was to try to minimize impact to all the town buildings. So we issued the RFP. The RFP came back with those two qualifying RFPs, and the proposals were for 1 Pleasant Street. It was a 5-year temporary lease with an option to buy. 1 Pleasant Street was a triple net lease. It started at $22 a square foot and escalated from there till year 5, with a purchase price to purchase only the first floor. And the caveat to that is they would have to condo the units in order for anybody to purchase just 1 floor of the building. The purchase price for the 1 floor is $3.2 million. If the town were to purchase the first floor within year 1, they would be credited back $175,000 of the rent payments that were made. This lease term is good for 5 years. If the town decided they were going to purchase just the first floor in years 2 through 4, they would no longer receive that credit, but the purchase price of $3.2 million is still on the table.
So Michelle,
yeah.
can we just drill in on that for a second?
Sure.
Years 2 through 5, you had initially characterized that as a first right of refusal.
Mm-hmm.
Just now you sort of presented it more as an option in years 2 through 5, but we wouldn't get the 175 credit. What exactly?
It's a first right of refusal.
And what does that mean? If he goes to sell it to someone else, we have the right to. I'm not sure I understand.
Yep.
What
You're
exactly?
Right
does
to
that mean?
outbid.
Yep. We have the option to outbid the person he's selling it to.
Okay, but we would have a 5-year lease, so he'd be selling it to. You're saying in that scenario, he'd be selling it to a new owner with a tenant in place.
Correct.
Okay, and does that apply to a situation where he goes to sell the whole building, and we would literally have the ability to say no, we have a first right of refusal on the first floor, or is it just in a scenario where he's selling the first floor? I'm saying he, maybe it's not a he, and I apologize.
No,
the
it is a
owner,
he.
How about that?
And we don't have that level of detail ironed
Okay.
out yet, but as of right now, our option is only the first floor.
Okay,
He hasn't condoized the building yet, though. So
Correct.
there's some paperwork between here and there.
that's
I don't want to get
right.
too lost
And
into the purchase thing, though.
okay. And I understand Clark was planning to join us. We can cover that a bit when we get through these proposals.
So,
Clark is on.
excuse me, Clark is on. We have Clark, David Farag, Mark Cameron, and Peter Longley. All
Okay.
on.
So we need to make sure that when we get through this, we get back to an understanding of the process of receiving approvals to do that if we were to, to hypothetically ever pursue that, just so that we understand that option. Okay, so years 2 through 5 is not an option per se.
No, it's not an op. It's a first right of refusal.
It's a first right of refusal. Okay. Thank you for that distinction.
Sure.
So Michelle, in the years after year one, you're basically saying if someone else came forward with another price higher than the 3.2, we would have to outbid them.
Yes.
Okay.
Peter Longley also
If you
has a
wanted to buy.
question. I don't know if you want to answer questions.
We're happy to do that, but I want to make sure the committee has an opportunity to ask all their questions on this first, and then we will certainly address Peter to the extent it's a question specific to this proposal.
It is, and I could probably answer it while we talk through this.
Yeah, I'm happy to pose the question, Brian, if you wanted to come from a committee member, because it is pertinent.
Sure,
It
go
is.
for it, please.
Yeah. So the question is, because of the cost of improvements for the space, is that already built into the lease as quoted? And is there any, exit clause where we'd be on the hook for some of these costs if we, don't meet the terms or once we exit the space?
Sure. So that's a great question. And yes, the lease cost does include all the build out of the space with the exception of a vault, which is something that we would have to install because that's not part of his normal office. He would never need a vault. And things such as AV equipment and furniture obviously is on us to provide.
And the vault, when we were discussing this before, when it comes to purchase, the vault was a couple $100,000, or was it $5? So what is that still the current cost?
No, it's actually a lot less expensive now. We have the ability to reuse the doors from the vaults in town hall, and move them over, and that was a large expense. So I think the latest quote we got was $48,000 for a vault.
Oh, okay, that's better than it was.
Michelle, let me quickly ask, does that include the vault for the archives, or is that
does
just
not.
one vault?
Just one vault. It does not include the archival vault.
The second vault that has to be considered here, right?
And back to Peter's question, we are not required to do anything to put it back. There's no expense to us at the end of the lease. We just turn in the keys and we turn back the lease.
Okay, so even if we build a vault in there, which I assume involves pouring concrete, we don't have to remove that. We can literally walk away.
Correct.
Okay.
So as
Does
far as
anyone want to share or Michelle, do you want to share just the spreadsheet of the rent costs, just so we can have it in the video since we're talking about it?
Sure thing.
Brian, are you okay with that? Sorry for jumping in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And Michelle, if you're having trouble multitasking, both posting and answering a question, I can pause, but I do have another question.
No, sure, go ahead.
Okay. In the select board meeting, there was a discussion that the proposal from the owner at One Pleasant, I think, included 16 or 18 parking spaces, and there was a request by the select board to secure, frankly, all the parking spaces that that aren't going to be used by the tenants. I think they were looking for 30. Pardon me, and just the numbers are rough numbers. But if you could just clarify the facts on this and where we stand, that would be very helpful.
Sure. So in total, currently the owner has 30 parking spots on his property. He does have to reserve 14 for the residential units above.
Yeah.
Therefore limiting the parking for town hall to 16 spots. What the select board asked was during negotiations, if is if we could add those additional spots in as if we were going to when we were purchasing the building. There is a way to reconfigure the lot to add an additional 15 spots to make it 30 spots for office use. We've spoken to the owner. He's willing to entertain it. Of course, we have to turn over a plan as to how we came about these 30 spots. He's willing to entertain it before all the site work is done. It's part of the negotiations. There's no promises, but we're in negotiations about it.
Okay, and it's my understanding that there's an MBTA
right
lot immediately adjacent
Yeah,
to it.
there is.
You get and you know, can you let us know how that could be integrated and or used by patrons of town hall?
Sure. So currently, there is a lot owned by the MBTA that currently serves as town hall, or sorry, as municipal parking. And that is directly next to the parking lot. There's also another area owned by the MBTA at the end of Smith Place, which is considered their staging area, that is very rarely used by the MBTA. And we're also speaking to them to see if we can use that as yet another municipal area. So there's a lot happening with the parking piece, but as far as negotiating directly with the owner, we are talking to him about adding those additional spaces to accommodate our needs.
Okay, is it so the one MBTA lot that's already used for town parking? Do we? I mean, is there any reason we can't use that, or a suggestion we can't, or do we have assurance that we can? Like, how do we think about that? Is that that real? Is that secure? Is that parking that's available for this
That is
building,
real.
is
It's
that...
secure. There's a lease in perpetuity. We've been using it for many, many years, and we can continue to use that.
Okay, so it's real and it's secure. This isn't just an
Yes.
idea.
No.
Okay, and how is that currently used? I mean, do people actually use it, or is it generally just sit out because no one really has a reason to use it?
I think in the evening it becomes overflow parking for the municipal lot. During
Yeah.
the daytime hours, what I've seen most is it's become parking for the construction vehicles that are working at One Pleasant.
Okay.
But I don't really see a whole lot of parking there during the daytime hours.
I'll add it was long-term parking for some not great vehicles until Chief Quigley started to enforce the parking ban. So thank you, Chief, for freeing up that space.
Okay. And the other MBTA lot that you characterize as a staging area, is that just north along the railroad tracks, or how do you where
Yes.
should we conceptually think about that?
Yes, you're exactly right. So it's at the very end of Smith Place, beyond the launch building, and it runs alongside the train tracks.
Okay, so it's pretty well in, because there's One Pleasant, then there's the launch, and then this is even further in. Is that
Exactly? Yeah.
okay?
Yep. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Mhm.
Okay. So here you see the rent analysis. So it starts at $22 a square foot. It escalates to $26 a square foot in year 5. You see here the total amount of rent in year 1 would be $193. However, we broke it out because in year 1 we were assuming 4 months, so it would be $64,000. While we do have to go to annual town meeting for the fund appropriation, here's the entire analysis so everyone can see exactly what we're looking at. It's for 7,500 square feet of space. That accommodates all the offices. I believe the only exception here for the offices is the town nurse is now going to move to Wilcott Commons, where her second office has always been.
Okay.
So she'll be over
Makes
there. But other than that, I think everyone else's needs are accommodated within the space.
Michelle, the rent escalation makes sense, but the CAM jumps year 5. I guess maybe it is. It's actually the same every time. It's just because it turns into 5. My brain short circuited. Actually, it's like, was it 40 cents a year every year, something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Never mind. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and Michelle, the operating expenses at 83 grand. I see we're paying. Well, there's a real estate tax number in here.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that we as a tenant would be burdened with in addition to the lease payment, or is that something the landlord pays?
No, so we're paying it, and because and I think there's a big misconception here, and I've heard this a lot, is that, we're taking we're taking taxes off the roll, but we're not, because we don't own this building. We have to pay as a tenant to the owner of the building. The owner is required to satisfy all of the needs of the town, which is real estate taxes, water, sewer, all of those bills. So acting as a tenant, we're required to pay a portion of all of these.
Yeah, I guess I've just never, and I have no experience with commercial real estate. Certainly residential real estate, the tenants don't pay the real estate taxes as a separate fee. It's embedded in the lease cost. Is this
commercial? This is common.
Triple net.
Yeah.
This is standard for commercial. Okay.
Yeah, I lease all my warehouse space. It's all triple net, just like this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I just That is why we're a committee of diverse experience, right there. Okay, that's helpful. And there's an elevator cost in here. How does that come to us, given we're not leasing the second floor?
So because you have to pay for a portion of all the common expenses of the entire building, you're still required to pay a portion of this.
Okay. So it's just based on square footage.
Exactly.
Okay. And I know there was a discussion at Fall Town meeting about also owning at that point. And keeping for town use. I mean, that proposal was to own the entire building. So let me just back up. But there was a discussion about keeping, in addition to owning the entire building, keeping one of the units upstairs for additional space. I think it was break room and maybe a meeting room or something else. What are the current thoughts on that? Is this still something the town feels like it wants to do or needs to do? Is that space that we absolutely needed, or is that just space that, in the context of looking at this as a permanent solution, would have made it more comfortable?
As a permanent solution, it would have made it more comfortable. As a temporary solution, I think we can live within the 7,500 square feet.
Okay.
That also means one more on the affordable housing roll, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, in the count, yes, it would.
Yeah.
Okay.
So moving here doesn't hurt our affordable housing inventory. Okay. Sorry.
Right. And this is probably getting way ahead of the current RFP or the select board recommendation on this lease. But just hypothetically, if we were to ever exercise the option, or in year one, or the first right of refusal in the out years, is there any mechanism other than just perhaps the relationship with the landlord to revisit that unit?
There is. So we have discussed it. There's always an option. I mean, we could purchase that one unit. We could even rent that one unit for an additional rental fee.
Okay.
But to minimize the cost at this point, I think we're just going to live within the 7,500 square feet.
Okay. And we might want to add that to the list of things we want to discuss with Clark when we get to it, because I guess if we as a town were going to rent that unit, it would probably be zoned residential or permitted as residential, and we'd need a change.
Let's not go too far down that path, right?
Yeah. I'm just thinking out loud.
Can we go back to the spreadsheet again? I want to make sure, Michelle, you saw that the total lease cost was $900 and some odd $1,000, I think. the operating costs, that would be in addition then, right? Yep, the $83,000. So they would have rent due, let's say in the first full year, 203,000. And because it's a triple net, the town would also be paying the 83,000 approximately for the operating expenses.
So that's included. So if you see here, you'll see
Oh, okay.
rent is 173,000, and then when you add the 29, you get to the 203. Sorry,
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yep, I didn't see that. Okay.
that's okay.
Sorry, I'm not sure I totally follow. So if the rent, let's move to year 2, which is a full year, right?
Mhm.
If the rent is 173, where are the operating expenses getting picked up? Is that in the rent?
No, it's additional. So it's so CAM is the operating expenses.
Yeah,
So
but CAM is
total amount is-
29. CAM is 29, and I'm looking at the operating expenses down below at 83.
Is that for the entire building though? And so the 29 is
Oh,
for the first floor. I don't know, Michelle, is that?
Is that
It's
it,
per
Michelle?
square foot. It's per square foot.
Yeah, the PSF. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Okay.
yeah, that's 23-24 operating expenses total per square foot, or take your 360, multiply that by 75.44, and then here you go.
Okay, so the 83,000 is for the entire building. Is that my understanding?
Correct.
Correct.
Yes, that's
Okay, so the CAM for us as a
What is CAM, please? Define CAM.
common area and management, something like that, Michelle. It's basically
Yep.
it's all the things. It's the triple net lease, which so it doesn't include maintenance, taxes, or whatever the other end is. So I keep forgetting. Yeah.
So I'm not clear on what you're referring to on the spreadsheet. When
So
you refer to CAM.
Column G.
F and G, CAM annual, CAM actual. So on commercial leases, you basically the rent per square foot, it typically does not include maintenance, taxes, snow removal, those sorts of things. Those are kind of added on as a separate thing. It's just how it's done in the industry. So when you're looking at rent, you have the negotiated per square foot cost, and then you have the maintenance and taxes. All those are called the CAM charges. So your out the door cost is your rent plus the CAM.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
And that's the total annual. That's really what we're
Exactly. Yeah.
looking
Total
at as a
annuals.
bottom line, which is H13 through 19. And then you're saying on top of the total annual, you're adding operating expenses?
No, total annual
No.
includes the CAM. So it's E plus G equals H. H is our out the door cost.
All right. So looking at rows 23 through 32, what do they represent? How many years?
That's just a snapshot for 1 year for the operating cost of the building. So if you're trying to figure out why our CAM is going to be what it is, so you see how if you look at F14, CAM per square foot is 360. If you're asking where that number comes from, it comes from that chart 23 through 32, where if you look at E32, the per square foot operating cost is 360. So that E32 connects directly with F14.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Sorry, Michelle, I'll let you answer. My apologies.
So our total cost per
Thank
square
you.
foot. Total cost per square foot's not on here, but it's basically it's column D plus column F is the dollars per square foot per year. Well, per month actually, but
H divided by 75.44.
Right.
Annual.
yes. Okay.
So Michelle, you said this is a 5-year lease, but the first year is abbreviated. So when you talk about the option to exercise the purchase, what date does that actual option?
So that's a great question.
on?
That's a question that Brian actually asked, that we clarify at the, during the last select board meeting. And the answer is when we were speaking to the owner, the year 1 will start when we execute the lease and we are able to occupy the building. So when there's a certificate of occupancy for us to occupy the building, year 1 will start.
Okay.
Thank you.
And in terms of that 1 year option, do we have 1 year to, to exercise the option? In other words, provide notice, which then triggers, I don't know what it is to close on a commercial real estate deal, 60, 90 days to close. Or do we have to give notice, sort of whatever, 2/3 of the way through the year, and then work breathlessly to actually close prior to the end of year one?
Yeah, so I don't think it has to do with closing. I think it has to do with notification.
So the exercise itself, not the closing. Okay.
Correct.
And what is the current anticipated occupancy date? I saw this spreadsheet a while, a while, in other words, a week or two, I think back. And March seems like it's probably not realistic given we're sitting here in February.
Right. So no,
So
March is
so
not
what-
realistic. You're correct.
Yeah, so what's real?
Yep. So I'm gonna say real is probably May 15th would be
Hmm.
real, although we're getting from the owner that it could be, late April, but based on the site work and everything else that has to still be completed, I would say May 15th would be the soonest you would see any movement.
Plus or minus a few weeks, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's almost right up against our fiscal year, quite honestly.
Exactly.
Okay. And I know Glenn Pratt has been pounding the table that, we should have a backup generator for town hall staff, regardless of where they are. What's the current thinking on that? Are they thinking a temporary unit here, a permanent unit here? What would it cost?
So I can't answer that right now.
Okay.
I think it would be temporary. It wouldn't be permanent. I don't think the town really wants to affix anything permanently to the building until there's some ownership rights other than the vault that's needed for the day-to-day, but I would
Okay.
think it would be temporary.
Also, I recall during the previous town hall discussion, the cost of the generator was one of the first things that the town pointed out as something we don't need. So I personally, I don't think we should be married to that because we've already got a pretty clear message on how important that is.
Well, we don't have it currently at 41 Highland, so yeah, I certainly hear the argument that this is just an added and arguably unnecessary wrinkle relative to status quo. I guess the other thing that's kicking around in my head, and I may have this number wrong, but my recollection was that that when we priced out a generator for Elm Street, it was like 70 grand. So it's not like a generator for the middle high school. This is, I guess, what I'm saying.
Correct.
I think I would not reject Glenn's suggestion. Remember that once you get into this building and there is no other alternative for a year or two, it does make sense, even if it's temporary. It does make sense to have a generator. So one should not throw that idea away arbitrarily, because in fact, that's exactly what is done now at 41 Highland. And in fact, a emergency generator has a connection which can be plugged in. So you should never reject this idea. In fact, you absolutely should have some way of providing emergency generation. That would be foolish not to have that. Absolutely foolish. So
Ralph, let me just ask you a question. Are you saying that that 41 Highland is already equipped for a temporary generator and that we have one arranged?
They roll one in and they plug it in. That's right.
All right. So, well, look, I don't think anyone's rejecting the idea of making sure that the wiring is adjusted so that we can roll that same generator down to Pleasant.
Absolutely not. Absolutely, you have to do that.
I don't think anyone's rejecting that idea. I think the point was this is no different than 41 Highland.
Except that has to be added in for a capability. That's all.
Okay, but not a permanent generator, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
There's no particular need unless you intend to be there indefinitely, right?
Okay, I think now we're all on the same page.
Right.
Okay, so it's a hookup, it's a wire. So we need to look into the cost of an equivalent hookup and cutover switch, or whatever the correct technical terms are,
Sure.
so that we can roll that same generator in there as needed.
I mean, there's a lot of ways to do that. I mean, I think Nick could probably get the space going with what it needs to go pretty simply. So.
Yeah.
Well, they're not even slightly simple. They have transfer switches, guys.
Ralph, I fully understand how these things work. However, I'm just saying that there's different levels of ways we can do it depending on the service level we need to do. And like 41 Highland is not, when you hook up the generator, it's not fully powered, right? You're talking about just backup systems and lighting. That's it. So I'm just saying there's different levels we can do this. We don't have to make it complicated to make the building, you know, but we should explore those things. But I'm saying Nick has the ability with staff we have to probably, you know, get a plan together cost effectively that keeps the building working the way we need it to do.
Okay, you know,
what I'm saying.
Okay, all the talk, guys. You do have to do it right. This is not a hand wave. You do this right. You have transfer switches. You can't have transfer switches that, in fact, don't disconnect and then reconnect. All of that has to be there. Anyone
Didn't suggest we didn't do that. No,
just know what they're
we can
talking
do
about.
I think we're all in violent agreement.
Okay, so
Yep.
just not
No,
diminish
I
the
agree.
complexity of getting it right.
Yeah. I would hope that we haven't done anything with regards to our backup generators not right. So hopefully this is just more of the same. Other questions on Pleasant?
Yes. Corey and Brian, you seem to have come to a conclusion that you're ready to go ahead with this.
Not
deal.
even in the slightest, Mike. Not even in the slightest.
What I'm hearing is discussion directly going to how to outfit this building. And I still feel that
Absolutely, because that's what we have to evaluate. That's what's in front of us.
well, before
a
we
problem,
get there, Brian,
which
it's
Ralph's
to
already pointed out.
answer the question of, is this required? Is this lease necessary? And what we have found over the last
Before we vote this,
several
Michael,
weeks.
before we vote this, we will debate that ad nauseum.
I don't
I'm
want to wait
confident.
to a vote.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the original need. Is there
Okay.
a need for this before we go any further down this road?
But the rest of the committee
Ralph,
disagrees
if you-
with you, Michael. I don't know what to say. We pulled 5 members of this committee, and plus our, you know, plus our backup, and people don't agree with you in terms of the order how we're going to handle this. So we're going to handle it based on the way that the committee has suggested we handle it. We will discuss this ad nauseum in the order that it's on the agenda. Does anyone
Mike,
have
I have
any
a-
other questions on One Pleasant?
I do think the critical other question is, what are the other expenses, permanent expenses associated with doing this? One of them is clearly IT. And so have we got a figure on what it will take to do IT for this building?
Ralph, yes, we do have quotes. We have a quote for the badge system to be installed. We have the quote for the AV equipment to be installed. We have a quote for new switching gear that will need to be moved over to be installed, and I can provide all of that to you. Not right this second, but I think it amounted to, I think it was close to about $80,000.
And that would include a fiber connection, routers, switches,
Mm-hmm.
Ethernet hub, and Wi-Fi distribution points.
Sure, and Ralph, I'm happy to give you the breakdown of what that is
I
that
don't
I
need
got
the-
from Ron.
I don't need it. I don't just want to make sure it's all there. That's all. I don't need to
Okay.
know. Just the total number is all I care about. Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Let me just
So
check that tomorrow, but I'll make sure I have that.
if we go back to the Q&A, Peter Longley has a number of suggestions for additional costs that Michelle, I think you need to answer for us.
I'm okay with that. I just I want to make sure that the committee's asked their questions first. Does anyone else on the committee have any other questions with regards to 41 Highland? Sorry, 41 Highland, One Pleasant.
So I like the idea that we're identifying here other additional expenses. Obviously, the rent is one thing, but Ralph's point about, you know, what are the electrical upgrades that need to happen and IT infrastructure, Michelle, there's got to be other, you know, top level things here that's on the radar. I'd hate for us to kind of get down the road and they go, oh my God, we've got $250,000 of stuff we didn't know about. Can you just give us your best, where you are now for other expenses that we need to consider in this.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, expenses that you need to consider with every move, right? It's moving expenses. You need your IT expenses. We do have to include the vault. There's furnishing expenses that go along with a new building.
Do we have any sense do you have a sheet you're working on adding all those up? Are we looking at another $500,000 in year one? I mean,
It's not,
I'm just
it's
throwing it
not a
out there.
half, I don't believe it's as high as a $500,000. I mean, it's significant expense. I can tell you that. I don't have that exact figure for you right now. I'm happy to follow up with it tomorrow, but yeah, there are absolutely additional expenses involved with moving the operations, and some of them include digitizing some records so that we're not moving all of our records over. But there are expenses, and I'm happy to share those with you. I'll pull them together.
Would it be possible to break those out into costs that we're going to incur? I don't want to say regardless, but we're going to incur if we're doing a 40, I'll use the word regardless of what path we choose here and the varieties of creative things. There's certain things that we are going to have expense. So could you break them up for us? Is that too much work?
No, not at all. So,
Okay.
so what I'm hearing is you want me to break out expenses, whether we go to 380 CJC or 1 Pleasant Street. What are those expenses? And then what if we are strictly just going to 1 Pleasant and how about that? How about this?
I think you should do them side by side, Michelle. I mean,
Okay.
it may be a different list as CJ Cushing. I just don't know.
Yep.
Well,
Fair enough. And then the option
plus,
to purchase obviously would have another expense involved because we would outfit it differently. So.
And then also, Michelle, things that are expenses, even if we move internally, let's say we do nothing on either of these properties as a town, what costs are we going to incur anyway?
Okay.
Because 41, I guess something has to happen with 41 Highland. A decision was made that's not kind of my purview. So just so we can understand.
Okay, understood. I'll put that together.
Corey, I'm not following what you're asking for. Could you explain, please?
Well, so we're talking about all these additional costs for things, right? So, what are costs that are associated with going to 1 Pleasant? So we just talked about electrical infrastructure in that building. We talked about IT infrastructure in that building. Well, if we move to another building, we're probably going to run into those anyway. So let's say we redeployed IT to, we found some phantom building that we just discovered and it's free. We'd still have an IT cost. So I'm trying to understand as best possible, what are the 1 Pleasant costs, what are the moving costs, and what are the costs of just basically relocating from 41 Highland that we're not going to avoid no matter what. Because those, again, we're just going to lay them out and say, if we're trying to make an A, B, C, D decision and A has a bunch of these one-time costs that we can avoid because they're just expenses, I think that's important to recognize. If a bunch of those costs are option D has a bunch of expenses, but they're half because we're doing things more efficiently, we need to identify those two. Does that make sense?
Yes. Actually, I was reacting to something that I thought you said about staying at 41 Highland. Did I misunderstand you? Because that was basically the zero option.
I was throwing that as a zero option. I don't know much about it. Starting from zero. Yeah. I'm
sorry to interrupt, but there is no zero option. There really isn't, because if we stay at 41 Highland, you still have to move people out of one space to do work, and there's just not enough space for all of us to do that maneuvering. So there's still some expense involved in moving some people to temporary space and being able to move things around.
And Michelle, respectfully, I don't think that the town has made its case properly in stating that 41 Highland is a non-starter. So let me just leave it at that. And that's what I've been so anxious about in this whole exercise is the dismissal of 41 Highland for reasons that have not been thoroughly vetted.
Mike, I want to hear,
and they may be.
No, I want to hear all of your things, Mike. I don't want to have it. You say this and then this and this. I want to give you your entire floor to go through the whole thing, and I mean that sincerely.
Okay, so let me ask then that I understand. Let me ask that 41 Highland be included as a zero option. With
It's the
vetted,
third item on our
validated
agenda.
figures. I'm
Yeah.
sorry?
It's the third item on our agenda tonight.
That's great, and I'm thrilled. But in this discussion we're having right now, in terms of gathering the expenses that are incurred in making a change to one of two locations, there should also be a third column for remaining in place, to have a true comparison of what the town faces.
We're totally good. That's totally on my mic. Exactly that way.
Thank you.
The other one I would add, Michelle, I hate to continue to bring it up, but Jackie brings it up every single time. There is another vault, significantly larger, and has all of the historical documents of the town, and is used periodically, and it's in the basement of the current 41 Highland Ave. That has to be considered as an expense to be moved, even if you move it to, for example, the vacated police department on Elm Street. It has to be part of the cost. You can't just ignore those. I mean, those are records that people ask Jackie for almost every other day. So,
No,
I mean, you just
I
can't
understand
say,
that. I understand that.
okay, good. There is a real cost associated. That's a big bloody vault, as you probably do know. It's huge. So
I guess we're going to need to think about that in the context of the fact that this RFP and the proposals in front of us are temporary space. And also in the context that, you know, there's no assumption that 41 Highland's going away as a building. So I
Yes, there is an assumption.
no, there's not. I have not heard a single serious person in the entire residence base of the town of Cohasset suggesting that 41 Highland get torn down. I just want to nix that right now, okay? Because I heard that nonsense. Sorry, I heard that theory at special town meeting, and now I'm just flat out upset. I've not heard one single credible person suggest that 41 Highland get torn down. If you can name that person, please do.
I could be wrong, but I believe it's Michelle in her estimates for the options. Now, I read this in the Anchor, and perhaps
Okay.
I'm attributing it.
I read things on 143. I've not heard one serious person in this town ever suggest that 41 Highland get torn down.
You're interrupting me now, Brian.
I am, Michael, because this is a complete rumor, and I'm upset now. This committee is not.
It's reported not on a website that is run in Facebook. It's reported by a journal. It's reported by the Cohasset Anchor, by Carol Britton, who included the cost for demolition on 41 Highland Avenue. Now, she had to get that. She included
it in cost. Did she actually suggest that somebody tear it down? Or is she just responding to a rumor that somebody planted out there?
The point I'm making, Ryan, is that there is a proposal somewhere that has been costed out to demolish the building. It's part of
building.
A part and parcel of yes.
So I think maybe I can help clarify what's
Thank you,
what's
Michelle.
being
Appreciate
spoken
it.
of. So I was asked during a meeting to come up with an estimate to remove the annex, not the historic building.
Agreed. And I hope I didn't misspeak, but I was referring to the annex.
So I think what's happening is a lot of people aren't understanding the annex versus historical town hall. And I think it's just growing legs that people are just assuming that the demolition means the entire building, not just the annex portion that's always been on the table to be demolished and rebuilt, or, you know, something's always been on the table about that. So I think maybe that's where the confusion.
Michelle, we're losing your audio.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I think that's maybe where the confusion lies, is it's just the annex portion, and whether we were to go through with a new town hall or a renovation of some sort, in all of the proposals, the annex is demolished due to the cost to renovate.
And that is the point I was raising.
Okay.
So I apologize if I misled anyone in thinking that I'm referring to demolishing the 1857 structure, no. But I am saying that there is a cost associated, it's reported in print or whatever serves for print for demolition as a cost of the 87 annex. Thanks.
Thank you for the clarification, Michael. Thank you for the clarification, Michelle. It's a fact that the annex was costed for demo in both of the last town hall in fact, all three of the last town hall renovation projects. That's not it. And there's no decision at this point around that. So all I'm saying is, in the context of temporary space, which is what this is, we need to contemplate whether or not we're actually moving the vault, because there has been no decision made to tear down the annex at this point in time. And even if it did come down, there's been no decision as to whether or not the basement level would be, would be removed, or just the building would be removed, leaving the vault behind.
If you don't mind my interjecting, and this is just, I hate to actually interject for Jackie's purposes, but she would never enter a building into the basement where no one was occupying it. There is no woman I know of.
Okay.
Jackie certainly is one, and she would not enter that building under those conditions, nor would you ask her to, nor would anyone reasonably ask a woman to enter an empty basement. Really,
Okay.
seriously.
So Ralph, what is your proposal with regards to a vault?
The vault, if in fact you're abandoning the building, even temporarily,
Mhm.
and there's no one in the building, means the vault has to go somewhere so it can be used.
And where is that?
That is up for the town to decide. That's all.
Okay.
It's simple.
All right. Well,
It's
we
just
may need to have an
it's
escort for Jackie
It's
until
a
we figure
cost.
it out.
It's a cost and availability question, not anything else. That's all. Simple.
Okay. Point taken.
Well, yeah, I mean, that does assume that we abandon the building. And again, this is what's complicated about this, right? We've got so many decision forks of things, and it's you can't digest all of them at once. But to Mike's point, you can't really understand any one of the branches without seeing the rest of the tree. So it's we're playing quantum physics here a little bit. I'm not a quantum physicist.
We
so
are. Before we move on to
apologize.
any other branches of the tree, does anyone else on the committee have any other questions, or should we turn it over to the guest that has some questions and some points to share?
I guess
I would
just make sure that we really do understand all of the costs of the move. I think that's a critical question. And although I cannot necessarily, know them all, only Michelle really can, you're the only one who can really tell us everything that you can imagine were costs associated with it. There could be legal costs, there could be all kinds of stuff. And in all fairness, we should really know them all. That's all I can say.
Okay. Anyone else from the committee, or should we recognize our guest?
Do we have another proposal?
We do. Do you want to continue through the other proposals, or does our guest with the questions have specific questions on this specific proposal?
So I
The
think
guest
most-
is good.
Oh, I'm sorry, Corey. I'm reading through Peter Longley's questions. And it
It's
looks
more running commentary.
Yeah,
Than
and it
than
looks as if
specific
his questions were around the generator and the transfer switch, and it's something that we will quote out for sure with
Okay.
our facilities director. And then his other questions go into 380 CJC, which I believe we're going to touch on next. So hopefully we'll be able to answer all of those questions.
Okay. Anything else on One Pleasant before we go to CJC? Okay.
No.
Let's move on to CJC.
Okay, so CJC, we also received a proposal for temporary space from Mr. Stasko. He has office space available above the Santander Bank and above Feng Shui. His space is slightly smaller at about, I think, 6,500 square feet. They're currently already built out offices. They've been used by, actually, the 250th committee used one of his offices. It's nice space. His rental price was very competitive. Apples to apples comparison, Pleasant Street versus 380 CJC. I think they were very comparable in price. CJC was a little smaller, Pleasant Street a little larger. CJC didn't have that option to purchase. Instead, Mr. Stasko developed a whole nother proposal, which we'll get to later. And when the evaluation criteria was done, I think people just really rated the One Pleasant Street higher simply because it was already in the village location. While Mr. Stasko's has more parking available to us. I think what people weren't in favor of was splitting the TM up in between two buildings, having to exit one building to enter another building to more office space. What else can I tell you? I think as far as the true analysis, I can pull that up as I did for One Pleasant Street so we can see the
Please.
sheet so you're comparing. Okay. Pull that up.
That occurs to me. The select board recommended One Pleasant, right? So the CJC option kind of really isn't on our table, is it?
It's not right now. When they recommended One Pleasant, we have to do our due diligence and negotiate with the owner of One Pleasant. If in fact we can't come to terms with the owner of One Pleasant, we then can go to Mr. Stasko and negotiate with him. We just can't negotiate with both at the same time because that would be in bad faith.
Okay.
Okay, so here we go. So the difference between CJC and let me share. The difference between CJC and One Pleasant is Mr. Stasko offered a gross lease price. So everything's included. It's not triple net. He's including everything in the price. So as you see on an apples to apples comparison, it's very similar. 848 versus the 9 and change for One Pleasant. The difference in square footage probably makes up for that. Again, the space is somewhat sufficient. We may have to move a couple of offices elsewhere, but we can figure that out. But apples to apples, I think the only thing that scored more heavily was the village location.
What did the total cost per square foot? So it looks like 30 through roughly 32.
Yep.
And
There's a comparison sheet if that's where you're going, Brian.
oh, I was just doing the math in my head. Whereas the One
I think
Pleasant
that's, yeah.
is sort of 25 through
Yep. So let me pull that up. I've done that.
Yeah, there's
31,
a sheet in
32.
the OneDrive. Yeah.
Yep. Hang on. Let me grab that for you.
I think what you're getting at, Brian, is on a pure square foot price per square foot.
Yeah.
One Pleasant is cheaper.
Starts out cheaper, and then they sort of can come closer to converging in the out years. It looks like, just doing the math in my head.
Yeah, they're certainly comparable.
Yeah, one was 31 low, the other one's 31 high. At least what I had in my head. Why is this not the same? 30, 30, 30. Yeah, see,
Yes. Something didn't carry over.
the price per square foot on One Pleasant does not map out to on that
30.
One Pleasant
Yeah.
sheet.
No,
So
correct.
I think there's
Are you
something
talking
wrong
about
with the
this,
map.
Brian? Are you talking about this specific comparison?
Yes.
What this comparison is saying is if we took the same rent per square feet and applied it to the 7,500 square feet,
Okay, got
this
it.
is the price.
What? That makes
Okay.
sense. Thank you, Michelle.
Got it.
So we're at 942 with the One Pleasant. This is 989. So
Okay.
if you want to just
If you were to apply the CJ Cushing pricing to One Pleasant, that's what you'd come out with.
it'd go up by 40 grand for the 5 years now.
Okay.
Which suggests that One Pleasant, you're getting at a discount,
It's a
Yep,
little bit
Francine, you're
lower
ahead of
cost per
us.
square foot. Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I was just doing the math, right? So in that first stub period on One Pleasant, it's 22 plus 360. So it's 2560 versus 30, right? At CJ Cushing. And then in year 5, it's $26 plus $5.27, which is 31.27 versus 31.84. So it starts out, materially cheaper, but then, converges over time. On a per square foot basis, that is.
Yes.
And I know, Michelle, both of these numbers are both of these square foot numbers are smaller than perhaps we'd like in a perfect world. Where do you guys start to feel where do you start to feel a break point in terms of like, okay, that's literally just not enough. And now we have to put, a handful of people in some other location entirely.
Yeah, so I think the 7,500 is adequate space for all of us and includes a meeting room. So there's space for collaboration and then meetings as well.
I assume that there's not space for the IT workshop that now occupies our basement. Is that fair?
That is fair.
Okay.
There's some space in Ron's office. It's a little larger than what he has now to
Yep.
accommodate some of that, but
Yep.
definitely not to the scope that we have today.
Okay. Nor was that ever contemplated in any plan that we've ever seen for a town hall project.
Correct.
Just to be clear. Okay. And can we fit in CJ Cushing, or would we have to peel off
It's too small.
units
So I think we would
or
just have to
departments?
peel off a couple. And I think we'd lose that collaboration space is really most of all. What we'd lose is the meeting space if we were to go to CJC, but I think it could accommodate our departments,
Okay.
albeit smaller and tighter, but
But you could get everybody in.
we could do it.
Okay.
Yep.
That's helpful to understand.
Yep.
And in terms of backup generators, is there already a backup generator there on site?
I'm embarrassed to say I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
It's something-
And
Sorry, what
would
building?
we
CJC?
Oh yeah.
and what would we do in terms of a bulb?
It's no different than what we'd have to do with One Pleasant. We would have to build a vault.
And do we have the ability to do that and leave that structure behind at no cost when we depart, like One Pleasant?
When we talk to Mr. Stasko, it's something we could negotiate for sure.
Okay.
He's very amenable to allowing us to
He
outfit
was,
it for our
yeah,
needs.
I was very, very appreciative of his of the flexibility that he was indicating at the select board
Yes.
meeting
Mhm.
a week ago. Yep. That's it for me. Other questions?
Peter Longley has some other comments we should read.
Can I just ask if someone else can monitor that? It's just really difficult to
Yeah.
monitor that.
Yeah, Mike, and I also, this really bugged me on the select board level. This is a committee of us, and it's not a chat feature. Like I like questions from the audience and whatever, but he's not a member of the committee. I know you have thoughts, and we haven't heard from you or I think Ralph about your thoughts. So I'd prioritize what you're going to bring to the table, Mike, over what an audience member would, if that makes sense. So we haven't given you the floor yet, Mike. So I'd rather give you the floor than let an audience member do so.
Let me add in a little thought here that this committee really is very significantly different than the select board committee, where the select board was fairly restrictive, as you probably know.
Yeah.
And it was our hope that this committee would be
I would not agree with that assessment.
That's all right. Quite frankly, we've experienced it, so I do know what I'm talking about. This committee has been very open at all times. In my entire history of this committee, this has been one of the most productive committees in the town, and maybe that's overstating it, but it is a productive committee because everyone does speak. and they speak what they think. And we invite others we ask others also to make their thoughts known as well without restriction. And the reason I have expressed even to the select board more recently is that it produces a better result because others think of things that we don't think of and adds to the actual value of the actual outcome of our deliberation. And I'd ask you to consider that and consider these other people who might join as important in my thinking as all of you are. And that's how I really look at it, because I did experience it. In spite of the fact I did, and I think Michael did too, we got specific invitations to speak to the select board, but there were many people who had comments and could only make those in the first opening of the select board, and usually for a minute or a little bit longer. It was generous in terms of time, but it added to the feeling that there was an awful lot to add to the discussions that didn't get added. So you understand where I'm coming from, and because I think this committee is different and more productive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Hopefully before we leave here this evening, everyone feels like they've been given the floor. It's not I do feel it's important that we also drive an agenda and make space for that. So, on One Pleasant, we went through the committee's questions and comments, and then I specifically asked if there were any questions from the audience, and I was someone who was reading Mr. I apologize, I don't have the name.
Mr. Longley.
Mr. Longley's comments suggested it was a running narrative, and it didn't need to be read. If people feel differently about that, then go ahead and read it in. But I'd like to, what I'd like to do is on CJ Cushing is do the same thing. I want to run the course with the committee, and when the committee's done with its questions and comments, certainly happy to hear from Mr. Longley. But to Corey's point, the committee should come first. Does anyone else on the committee have any other questions with regards to CJ Cushing? Okay, so do we have questions or comments for Mr. Longley?
Yes, we do.
Specific to CJ Cushing, just to be clear, specific to CJ Cushing.
Yes.
Okay.
So I can either read them or we can promote Mr. Longley.
If they're concise, I'd rather you just read them. But if that somehow breaks the spirit of it, we will promote it.
Mr. Longley points out that if the need for the space is just for the duration of the renovations, and I'm not sure if he's referring to renovations at 41 Highland or renovations at One Pleasant, the CJC deal, and I hope I'm not misreading you, Mr. Longley, Peter, this is a much better financial deal. Plus you can park there. I think you're referring to CJC. That if we're truly doing temporary space, then far less than 5 years for a renovation at 41. The deal at CJC is better for the town to have temporary space, and there's parking there. Peter also points out that he believes that we can come up with a plan that does not require the complete abandonment of 41 Highland during construction or improvements. This also solves the vault problem, which can remain where located. And then finally, he points out, if the work at 41 Highland is complete in 2 years, you save $750,000 by renting Stasco's space, plus the unidentified costs of a vault and so forth that you would do elsewhere. Peter, if you can just put into the Q&A if I got that right, or if there's anything you want me to correct.
So Peter also needs to give his address because this is a public meeting with members that is called to order.
Why don't we?
And also, I think we need to distinguish between running commentary, which is what this was, and questions. We have questions. I appreciate the opinions. We can do math, but this isn't. If we have 15 people on here giving us their opinions, this gets out of hand. So I support questions, but we'll have a time to hear from everybody when it comes to their opinions.
Well, what we have here is a subject matter expert that's providing advice.
I
and
don't know who
guidance.
Peter is. I don't know who Peter is. Who's Peter? He
Okay,
hasn't
good.
identified himself. We don't
That's a
know any
very
of this
fair
is.
question.
Sorry.
So, Brian, it's your call as chair, but I would recommend that we promote Peter. He can introduce himself, give his qualifications and address, and any thoughts he would like to share as a subject matter expert. And we also have Clark Brewer, who's also a subject matter expert and a member of the planning board.
And if we're gonna
I
move
think
to
we're going to
21
do
Highland-
that on the next item. We've heard his point that based on his math and the assumption that this is a 2-year renovation at 41 Highland, that it would be cheaper to go with the Stasco space. Those are his assumptions. And yes, under those assumptions, that math is correct.
Okay,
Assuming that
fair
it's
enough.
not a 5-year lease. So I don't think we need to debate that. We're going to get into 41 Highland and propose renovations in a moment. I think the first thing that we're probably going to come across is the fact that there is no plan currently for renovations. So, to make an assumption that it's 2 years is arbitrary. And, we can cover that once we move on from CJ Cushing. And I'm confident we're going to be hearing from both Mr. Longley and Mr. Brewer in a moment. But is there anything else on CJ Cushing that's not clear based on that comment that would require us to engage with Mr. Longley on it right now?
Just for a clarification on CJC, so there's flexibility on that lease. It could be 2 years or it could be 3, depending if, again, this branch of the tree, if there's 41 Highland and it's able to be put back in service for 2 years, the lease term has flexibility. It's not also, we had 5 years of lease on here, but Michelle, is it not strictly a 5-year lease?
No, so it can be flexible. And Mr. Stasco also presented an alternate proposal for maximum flexibility of smaller space for shorter term. So his proposal is very
information.
flexible. Yep.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, so just to be clear, we're not required to sign a 5-year lease. Or we sign a 5-year lease, but with the option to walk away early. Like, how does this work? I mean, do we have to commit to a 2-year lease? Because if we sign a 2-year lease, we're not guaranteed any terms at the end of 2 years, right?
So based on the proposals, Brian, we did ask for 5-year lease terms. One
Yep.
Pleasant gave us a 5-year lease term for temporary space, and so didn't 380 CJC. Those were the original proposals. Since then, after the fact, so we received an alternate proposal from 380 CJC that
Okay.
would give us less space for a minimum term. But if we're looking at the RFPs and qualifying them as we should, it was a 5-year lease. We're signing a 5-year lease for temporary space.
Okay, so I heard Mr. Stasco's comments at the select board meeting with regards to, if we just wanted to move, one department into one of the spaces, we could literally do it month to month. I heard that loud and clear. But in terms of moving the entire town hall staff operation over there, is it truly a flexible proposal? Or is it where we have to pick the term up front? And then that's the term, because it is extraordinarily, if it's 5 years, it's 5 years. If it's 2 years, it's 2 years.
So
Unless an explicit exit clause.
Yes. So what we asked for in the RFP was 5 years. That's what we're comparing.
Okay.
That was the desire at the time, to ask for 5 years. So that's what we did.
Okay,
If we're negotiating, we can certainly negotiate a shorter term. That will change probably everything and maybe inflate the prices a bit. Short-term tenancy and commercial space probably isn't the most advantageous.
Well, it also creates risk on the back end. I mean, we can sign a 2-year lease, but are we really going to have a place to take the staff in 2 years?
Is that a
I mean,
question?
I guess it's a rhetorical question to which I think we all know the definitive answer. But that's the issue. I mean, you either sign a 5-year lease and recognize that you're in for the cost, including walking away early, or you sign a short-term lease and run the risk of, having a town hall staff that's homeless at the end of a short-term lease.
or moving again, or paying more
We're
money.
moving again, right? Which is which is prohibitively expensive when you start doing it, every 2 years. Okay. Any other thoughts, questions, comments on CJ Cushing? Okay. Why don't we move over to 41 Highland, which, again, just to be clear, is not part of the RFP, but it's sort of the zero cost baseline. I put that in quotes.
Okay, so 41 Highland, how do you want to approach this? Do we want to talk about potential renovation costs? Do we want to talk about the fire separation? Where do you want to take this conversation? Because I think 41 Highland has so many components to it. I just want to make sure that I'm approaching it.
Yeah, we're certainly going to get to the fire separation cost because that runs across all of the, all of the, as Michael's accurately pointed out. I mean, it's an underpinning to, to some degree to all of these. There's another common thread in addition to that runs across all of these, which we can get to in a few minutes. But I am interested in at least, and I'm interested in the rest of the committee's views. But why don't we start with what the thinking is with regards to renovation of that space as an alternative, because that seems to be, where some people would like this to go.
Sure. So,
and I just want to ask the rest of the committee: is that what the others on this committee would like to do next?
I would like to hear what I don't want to say the bare minimum because it's a little reductive, but I'd like to hear what we need to do immediately if we were not to move somewhere. Like, what is the highest priority? I mean, I think I'm thinking my brain triage here, right? We're not spending $25 million to redo the whole thing. I saw that spreadsheet with $16 million renovation. We're not doing that either, right? So if what is the base level? There's, I need to understand what we have to do, regardless of making a decision or not, what we absolutely have to do to this building to keep using it or to move or whatever. I need to understand, what the dollar is for what we're spending, period.
Okay. And is that what others would also like to cover? Mike, Ralph, Francine, Susan?
Yeah, I think you do need to have, I think you need to start, I think, to be honest with you, with John, the building inspector's letter as to what, in fact, he suggested would have to be done short term. I think that's what you need. And it's well defined there. I can see it. There's two paragraphs, 1, 2, and several subparagraphs. Just go through those and you will then have some idea of what he talks about. We may have some other talk about that later, but I do think that, in fact, there's a specific set of recommendations here that would keep people in the building at least through May and maybe longer. Okay.
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 You want me to read them? Would people want to hear what they are? And
If you have them in front of you and you'd like to read them, I think that'd be great. I don't have them in front of me.
Okay,
So that'd be helpful.
Okay, why don't I do that? I could, I suppose, share a screen, but I'm not sure I know how to do it. Okay, but I would be glad to if I could. I probably could. I'd have to go dig it out of my files, but that's all right. Let me read them. It's easy enough, okay? He said, action needed to comply with the Mass State Building Code, blah, 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 for the Cohasset Town Hall includes relocating occupants from the historic unsprinklered portion of the Town Hall to the sprinklered portion of Town Hall, referred to as the 1987 edition or annex, or to other location as necessary. That was point 1. It was moving the people out of the historic building, and that tends to be things like, I think it's...
do we have a head count and or a square footage on that part?
Somebody should give us that. I don't have those numbers. I don't have a head count or a square footage. But there are, 6 or 7 people, something like that, Michelle?
Yeah, it's roughly 3,000 and change in terms of square feet over there. I don't know how many people.
Thank you.
Okay. The second one is, this is a longer paragraph, okay? A separation will need to be created between the sprinklered and unsprinkled sections of Town Hall by A, submitting plans by a design professional of proposed work for plan review and issuance of a building permit. Separation requires a 2-hour fire rated system. C, repair 90-minute fire door in basement. I think that's a repair of a fire door. Install a 2-hour rated assembly at area between auditorium and annex. Install a 2-hour rated assembly at second floor hall between Old Town Hall and annex. Prepare and install 2-hour separation assembly in the area between above the men's bathroom ceiling. I'm a little puzzled as to the word assembly area here, but anyway, those are the words, exactly what was here. Okay.
And that was in our packet. I think that was quoted at $16,000 or something like that, Michelle.
Oh, I don't think we have a number, to be honest with you.
The fire separation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did receive a quote for fire separation. It came in at about 28.5 if we were to do that during normal business hours. If we wanted to do it on weekends to not impact the day-to-day, that would escalate to about $35,000.
So it's 25 to 35, is that it?
About 28.5 to 35.
Okay, got it.
Ralph, part of what you just read off was occupancy permit. I heard the select board ask that too.
Yeah.
This is kind of an open question, but maybe for you, Michelle. I mean, isn't the case that the building is not compliant in, really an infinite number of ways? So, it's not even possible that this building would get if it was new construction, an occupancy permit, kind of regardless of what we did to it, not regardless, but so I'm a little bit curious about the
well, no, let me read the last paragraph then, because this will clarify it. If all of the above steps are taken, then it is my opinion that the 1987 edition fire sprinklered portion of Town Hall will comply with the building code and be available for occupancy. It says the actions listed above would allow for a new certificate of inspection to be issued. So he's saying if you do this, you can use the annex building. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ralph.
And what becomes of Old Town Hall? Zero use or assembly use or office use?
No,
or
it's completely unoccupied, even for the drama club. Everything is completely unoccupied, unfortunately. Even for voting, everything is off the table, unfortunately. And that is true today, unfortunately. Yeah. Rightly or wrongly. So we'll talk about that part later. But anyway, it's really a sad outcome here. So.
And how long can that, so it would be a permanent occupancy permit with regards to the annex?
Well, as I read you what I read you, okay? I'm not going to try to interpret it, but I see that if you give a certificate of inspection, and it's his opinion that is complies with the building code, yes, it's full occupancy. Now, anyone can dispute that, but I'm not saying I know how to dispute it, but the words are clear, okay?
Okay, Michelle, do we have any idea how long this work would take to complete?
So we did reach back out to the vendor today. We received some stamp plans from an engineer to install the fire separation. So we went back to the vendor. They quoted us, asked them for a timeline. We were given probably 4 to 6 weeks for the entire project to be completed, to complete the fire separation. If we're going to talk about fire suppression, that's a whole nother.
And how much of that 4 to 6 weeks is on site? In other words, how many days is our staff disrupted?
So I'm not sure. We haven't received the timeline back from the vendor.
Okay. So I'm sure part of this is just ordering this stuff in. Okay. But for another $7,000, they could do it on weekends and not disrupt the staff at all. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. And I heard reference to a continuous fire monitor walking the halls of the building, literally looking to see if it was on fire. Would that continue in this scenario, or would that go away?
Let me read it. I think it goes away. Let me see if I can get to the paragraph here. It says here, until occupants of the historic unsprinkled portion of the town hall can be relocated and the above measures are completed and pass inspection. This is again, until occupancy of the historic unsprinkled portion of Town Hall can be relocated, and the above measures are completed and pass inspection, the town must rely on fire watch details during normal business hours. I would read that to say he will require the fire watch until such time as that completion of the fire separation is done. That's how I read that paragraph. I ought to put that paragraph up for everybody. If you want to see it, I think I can do it. I'm looking for it. Do you want to see it or not?
I'm fine. You can put it up.
If I can, okay, I got to find
Yeah.
it in my files here somewhere. Oh, gosh,
I mean,
okay, maybe I've got it. Let's see if I got it. Yeah, okay, I do have it. Okay, let me see if I can do a screen share here. Let me get back over here. Yeah. Share screen. Where is it? It's
And
here.
this is all John Hallen's opinion. This is not a third party.
This is John Hallen, right? Okay, let me see if I can shrink this down so you see the whole thing.
and what's the date on this, Ralph?
Let me pull it down. Okay, so you
Okay.
can see. Oh darn! Come on, where'd it go? Ah, jeez. Sorry about that, guys.
Oh, you're doing good.
Go back up here and do it again. Did I lose it? Oh, shakers. Share. I apologize. I have screwed this up utterly, completely.
You're doing better than I would, Ralph. So,
I had it and then I tried to shrink it so you guys could see it, and then I screwed it up. I'll stop the share and I'll reshare.
Oh, Michelle's got it.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
it,
yeah.
Michelle.
Oh, that's it right
Right.
there. You
I've
got
got
it.
it for you.
Okay, good. All right.
Just so is my understanding correct that John is the be all and end all of this? If he says this is all we need and we do the work, that's it. We don't have to call in some third party to get anything done. I want to be sure that we don't spend this money if we go down this route and then we all of a sudden go, oh, well, we still can't do it because of some outside agency that has some other opinion.
Well, technically, unless his opinion is appealed, it is the final judgment. Now, anybody could appeal it usually, but it would have to be appealed, I think. So someone could appeal it. This one doesn't say it, but I believe it can be. The previous one that he wrote was not appealable. This one, I think, is appealable.
Okay.
Yeah. It would be a 45 days from the day it was issued.
Okay.
And others should speak to this. It should be a Peter Longley or a Clark Brewer thing. They know much, much more than I do. I'm parroting what I heard them say. Okay.
I'm just trying to read it. I don't want anyone to interpret it just yet. Okay. I mean, I've been through it. Others need more time, or are we through it?
I've read it, but the letter from the the fire department of February 1 references this memo, and the fire chief is saying that he concurs with what is said here.
Okay. So basically, the conclusion is we spend the 28 to 35 grand that the occupants can remain in the annex in perpetuity. Is that how people are reading this?
It's certainly the interpretation, but we got to be careful about this interpretation. But I believe that's what it says. Yeah.
Okay. If people feel like we need John to affirm that our interpretation is accurate, that this is a permanent solution
Sure.
for the annex.
Sure. Well, no, he shouldn't. That's not the question. The question is is it fully occupiable is the question, not his opinion about whether or not we should or shouldn't. It has to, his is only about, is it code compliant and occupiable at that stage? Those are the questions. He should not weigh in on utility, appropriateness or anything else. Those are.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Right. Totally agree, Rob.
Yeah.
And we'd probably do that. We'd probably do that in the context of the capital budget appropriation for that cost anyway, right? I mean, if that's a request in front of us, we'd certainly expect John to come and reaffirm that this is all it needs for us to use it once that request is actually made of us. Because that's not actually being made yet, is it?
It's not, but it would certainly need to be.
Yeah.
If done appropriately.
Okay, so that's the baseline. The baseline is we lose 3,000 square feet. We moved all the people up there around. We're spending, let's say, $40,000 on building a door, just so we can stay. The people that are in the annex and stay in the annex. That's the the bottom of the most bottom.
I think
I would want to point out that it's not so much that it's 3,000 square feet. It's, I believe, 7 or 8 individuals, and Michelle, you could tell us the exact number, that would need to be relocated. The space that they occupy right now on that second floor corridor is far less than 3,000 square feet, I believe. Now, there's also the auditorium, and I'm not sure if that's included in the 3,000 square feet number, but I think it's misleading to say that we're losing 3,000 square feet. Well, what we'd be losing is that office space for assessors, for sewer, I believe the accountant.
So there's 9 employees upstairs that we'd be losing. We'd be losing the engineering office, sewer, finance office, assessing, and facility space.
Yeah, and Michael, the 3,000 number that I threw out there came off of my recollection, which may or may not be accurate, of the CAD plan that Mr. Brewer circulated to me and I circulated to the committee. So if the number I threw out is inaccurate, but my mental math was that was 3,000 square feet up there roughly.
Okay.
We can pull it up and look, and it may very well be wrong.
It's not a fatal amount of square footage, Mike. I wasn't trying to create a narrative to create a conclusion. I was just doing the math. I mean, it's 3,000 square feet is not a lot of space, but it is a cost to consider.
So it's 9 employees, and I don't know if anyone has that plan in front of them. Again, I'm working off a Wi-Fi hotspot right here, so I can't exactly toggle, but I circulated that email to the group. If anyone can pull it up and look, we can actually put a number on this.
I could try again, but I'm afraid I won't be successful. I'm sure I got it somewhere. So
you don't need to put it on screen. If someone could find it.
Okay, see if I can find it. Right.
I think I circulated that email yesterday.
Yeah, it came through. Right. I gotta go find it.
And it did not include the auditorium, Michael. It was just the second floor.
All right, I've got it up now. I do have it up now. If you want, I will share. I think I can. I don't know. I won't share screen. I can't do it. So. There it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can't exactly read it. I don't know if someone else can over there on the left. Yeah, but there should be a number right under it. Second floor existing. Okay, so it doesn't break it into 2, but you can go to the next one over, which is first floor on the annex. That's what, 6,300, and this is first floor here is what?
30 something.
Yeah, Brian,
Down.
if you go to the drawing on the left, which
Yep.
is the second floor,
Yeah.
and scroll up and enlarge, and pick off the square footage for the assessors, for the accountant, then you'll get a number.
Well, it's all of these.
No, it's not all of them, I don't believe.
No, I right there. So it's assessor,
Yeah.
procurement, DPW sewer, assistant town accountant, financial director, and facilities,
2, 4.
right?
That is correct.
Yeah. I mean, we can debate whether or not you want to include the conference room and the file space, but okay, but it's 7 offices, plus common space. Yeah, it's at least 2,000. I don't know how you depending on how you want to add this up in terms of the common space. Okay. It's kind of 2,000 without and about 3,000 with, which is what I had recalled. Okay, so it's 7 offices, 9 employees.
And Michelle, has there been any talk about adding sprinklers to Fort? That's probably something that's just not possible, but I just thought I'd ask.
So Brian, Joyce, and Nick Berardi are working on getting fire suppression costs for the historical town hall, the historic portion. I think there's a little bit of chicken egg here, right? Do you want to put fire suppression in if you're going to renovate, like what comes first? Because you certainly don't want to invest, $1 million, $1.5 million in fire suppression if in fact you're going to renovate. It's like what comes first. So I think that's what the town really needs to figure out. But they have been looking at quotes.
There is a really an important debate there. Many of us believe saving the historic town hall really is important. Irrespective of when we do it, it really is important that building not actually catch fire and burn to the ground. I really think that's critical. I really do. So one way or the other, I believe the town should either now or in the future do that as soon as possible, quite frankly. And almost separate your thinking about that a little bit. Just make sure that that building is safe is the way I look at it.
So Ralph, is now the time to bring up the point of the 1857 building being labeled as protected by its building materials that are currently installed?
If people are willing to understand our original reason for getting involved in this at all, yes, because our original reasons involve some very basic questions which I think have never been properly resolved. Yes, if you want to hear them, you'll have to understand where we came from and why we've been working on this for 3 or 4 weeks and why we're so concerned about it all. Sure, if you want to hear it, great.
I'm going to defer to others. I certainly want to hear everyone's view as to whether or not they want to hear this. I'm personally willing to hear it and interested in hearing it. I don't think it's been fully, voiced at the select board. I will also caveat that interest in by saying sooner or later, everyone needs to come out of this building anyway, and that's the counterbalance that's kicking around in my head. But that said, I am certainly interested in hearing where we are on what appears to be a disagreement regarding the fire code, recognizing that this committee is not qualified to adjudicate it. So that's my position. I'd be curious how others feel.
I mean, sorry, Francine, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd like to hear what Ralph and Mike have gone through at this point, or what information they've collected. And I'm just looking at the agenda. I don't know that we talked about the last item on the agenda, the new building proposal. And I don't know if we want to try to do that first or not, also just being aware of the time. But I do want to hear what Mike and Ralph been working on or gathered so far. Absolutely.
But
Same. I'm agreeing with Francine. We've heard the other things. We've identified a bunch of problems. I think right now I'm in measurement mode of how far along are we on each of these things, knowing that we have a timeline of some unknown shortness. So I certainly want to hear now from Mike and Ralph everything that they've discovered, because now I've got a bunch of stuff in my head to consider at the same time.
yeah, Susan.
Yep, I agree. I think it's time to hear it.
All right.
I'll just make one comment about the previous discussion. It would be good to have not only the financial numbers, but the pluses and minuses of everything. I think that's the other little sort of subtlety of whether it's CJC or it's One Pleasant Street. It's more complex when you add in all of the variables. So there are more variables. I don't want to lose that, but basically that's the only thing I'd add to the previous discussion. Okay, make sure you understand all the variables, positive or negative, right?
Okay, Michael, Ralph, the floor is yours, as we promised from the outset of this meeting.
Michael, do you want to go forward or want me to go
Sure.
forward? You go forward.
I'll just give a brief introduction. I think Ralph, as the engineer, has a good handle on all of it. Last December, when the building inspector issued a letter telling the town that it had to get everybody out of 41 Highland Avenue, we heard from a number of subject matter experts informally. One is Peter Longley. He's an architect with 41 years of experience. He's been the architect or deeply involved on major skyscrapers. He knows what he's talking about. Clark Brewer is another Cohasset resident, also a long tenured expert in the field of architecture and building codes. And they felt and expressed that John Hallen's letter was inaccurate on a number of points, and they specified what those points were. What I see in the letter that Ralph shared today was that I think John Hallen came around to our points of view, that he recognized that there were errors in the building codes that John Hallen referenced in his letter. There are two key points that stuck in my mind. One is that the designation on the 1857 building as a place of assembly was mischaracterized according to the proper application of the code. It had a letter designation that John Hallen used a letter designation in the code that's used for auditoria that have fixed seating, are set up for ongoing gatherings where people are seated in place. When in fact our auditorium comes under a different designation for assembly halls that use movable chairs, removable chairs. You can empty out the hall. It enjoys a much different requirement. Secondly, in the 1857 structure, John Hallen referenced the fact that it was an unprotected space. And I asked, what does protected or unprotected mean? Protected refers to the building materials that surround the flammable structural components. And in the 1857 building, there are fire rated, and I hope I've got this right, please correct me if I'm wrong, Clark or Peter. There are fire rated building materials, gypsum, wallboard, that surround anything that is flammable to keep the building safe within a certain period and a certain temperature. It's there to prevent the building from catching fire. So those two elements where we found that John Hallen's determination was faulty and set the town down a road that it did not need to go down, to actually remove everybody from both buildings. Now it seems like, and I'm repeating myself, it seems like John Hallen has walked back some of those considerations. The whole notion of firewalls and space in between buildings, I'm not clear on entirely, but what I do rest on is the fact that the 1857 building is a protected building, and according to the state codes, by definition as a protected building, is able to withstand fire. So that's really where we started. Okay, I see Peter has a comment, so let me just see what he says here. Okay, Peter offers in our Q&A that plaster, which is fire resistant, was used in the 1928 work in the 1857 building to protect the structural elements. Okay, so that's just some additional support for our position. Along the way, we gathered a group to try and persuade the select board that this was something of a hasty determination in that letter in December of 15th, and that we ought to rethink this. This working group, which was myself and Ralph Clark Brewer and Peter Longley, felt that we were not being heard, and I'm bringing this position to this group in hopes of getting a full picture described on what the risks and deficiencies are, and can these risks and deficiencies be mitigated within a cost that the town can tolerate before we start going to other buildings. Ralph, do you think I've captured it accurately?
I'd say so. I'm sure I can add some of the thoughts in if people want it. So
yeah.
Ralph, there's something you'd like to add, please.
Okay. I think I probably ought to cite what he wrote. This is what John Hallen wrote on December 15th, which actually precipitated everything we're now doing. And I'm going to read you what I believe are the critical paragraphs on this, because they really are not entirely the basis of the dispute, but certainly are the reasons why we became very concerned. He opens up. This is John Hallen's writing exactly, and he writes to the town manager, Chris Senior. He says, "The current town hall located at 41 Highland Ave, Cohasset, does not meet the minimum standards of laws in effect," and he cites the chapter 780 CMR of the State Building Code. Unless, and then he goes on, he actually cites directly from the law. He says, "Laws in effect, unless specifically provided otherwise, in 780 CMI, the code of building code, and narrowed to the provisions of 780 CMR, any existing building or structure shall meet and shall be presumed to meet the provisions of the applicable laws, codes, rules, or regulations, bylaws, or ordinance in effect at the time such building or structure was constructed or altered, and shall be allowed to continue to be occupied pursuant to its use and occupancy, provided that the building or structure shall be maintained by the owner in accordance with 780 CMR." That's his lead paragraph. Okay, that's an important paragraph. And why that's important is that what cannot be allowed to happen without having chaos in the building industry would be that someone could come in and after the fact say you don't meet code, and that is just simply declaring you don't meet code because I don't believe you met code. But if every building were under that kind of a possible threat, it is absolutely destructive to all of the building codes, because obviously you can't allow someone to reconsider a code if it was considered properly done in the beginning. Otherwise, it's just every building in town would have to be redone under those rules. So it's that paragraph says you don't have to redo the building if it was done properly in the building. But he goes on and says, he said, the 1987 construction, ID the annex, was not done in compliance with the fourth edition, as there is the fourth edition was the time of the 1987 building being built. So it was done in accordance with that edition, as there is insufficient separation between the original town hall and the addition, which resulted in a failure to meet height and area limitations. Okay. And then he goes on in the last one more paragraph. He says, as a result, it is unsafe for occupancy. Okay. Let me tell you what unsafe for occupancy meant. It meant that you could not occupy the building under any conditions and should not have been able to occupy it even after December 15th, which is quite extraordinary. Presumably, you would be able to appeal this, but unfortunately, when we checked with the state building inspectors, they said no. The words unsafe for occupancy have specific legal meaning, which means you have to leave the building, which is quite remarkable. We didn't leave the building, but that's where it stands today. It's really that's why it's so alarming as to what this said, because it puts the town in enormous liability for that because of those words. And that's where we are today. However, as a result of this letter and what I decided I would do, I would try to see if I could find any of the original occupancy permits or any documentation whatsoever that would support the position that this building was done according to code in 1987. The answer is there are none. Zero. Nothing exists. Every single possible, even archival document has been taken and gone. It is really quite remarkable. Nothing exists. So you cannot prove or disprove the occupancy permit was issued or whether it was correct. It is almost astonishing to find that out, but that's the truth. And that includes everything in the archives, everything. In addition, with the help of the town clerk, we looked at all other records we could find, and we could never find any of these records. Anyway, as a result of that, I called up the architect who still lives. His name is Brett Donham, and for full disclosure, he's a classmate of mine. He went to Harvard Architectural School as well, and was an ethical individual. No, there's no doubt about it. And I said, what do you make of this? And he said, I will write a letter to the town with my recollections of what we had done when we were actually designing the building. And so he did send a letter to Chris Sr., in which he asserts that, in fact, it was done according to code, and there was no reason why they would not have done it to code. And if you want, I can probably, I don't know if I can pull that letter up, but I think maybe Michelle has it. I'm sure Michelle got it. So the first thing was, it was very clear from the architect that the building met code at the time, and therefore under CMR 780, it meets code today. Okay. This didn't seem to satisfy Mr. Halen and Helen, and I and others met with him as a group, and then I met with him individually twice to say, John, are you under pressure to say this? Why did you say this? It doesn't seem to be any evidence that this is actually a factual matter that you're dealing with. Anyway, we got nowhere with Mr. Helen as a result of that. And then Peter Longley and Clark got involved, and they looked into this height and width question and tried to determine whether there was any truth to the matter that the building did not meet code under the fourth edition of 780 CMR. And they have concluded there is no reason to think it did not meet code or does not meet code today. The reason to relate all of that is the premise of where we're going. And I'm not trying to say don't do another building. I'm not trying to say anything like that. I'm just trying to say the urgency with which we're doing this is based on what I believe to be an error in judgment. For whatever the reasons, and you can imply whatever reasons you want, but it's an error in judgment. And as a result, we're scrambling around doing something which does not need to be done immediately or on a panic basis, but needs deliberation. So we can talk about, what building do you really want to be in? Do you want to renovate this one? Do you want to actually build a new one? Would you want to be in one Highland Ave? In other words, it needs a debate without the urgency, is my view. And I think there's adequate evidence that there is no urgency at this time. Mr. Hallen, as we read, has given us an option to avoid some of the urgency, or maybe all of the urgency, I don't know. But we were involved because we said this letter is an error, and it's an error. It's creating a panic in the town, upsetting the employees, doing an awful lot of things. It's like crying fire in a crowded building. It's just that serious what happened here, and those very words, unsafe for occupancy, are so serious that in fact it created this whole question. So there you are, and that's why we got involved, and we have said all of this to the select board, who listened politely, but didn't think it was important enough to actually hire. And we suggested hire somebody else, a third party, to go in for $2,000 or $3,000 and determine whether we're right or wrong here. Don't take the advice of Peter Longley or Clark Brewer. Get a third party, independent of everybody. No, they didn't want to do that. So anyway, that's where we are.
Can I ask?
Corey has his hand up.
Oh, sorry.
So sorry.
Brian, Corey has his hand up.
Francie, if you had a question, I've got a little bit of soliloquy to go on, so please go.
Sorry, I was
Start
just
first.
jotting notes, but Corey, Francine, whoever wants to go first, the next will go next.
Thank
Francie,
you, Corey.
you go, please.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm just barging in here. I just had one question, Ralph. The select board meeting last week that I did listen to, and I saw that question was raised, having another third party. I thought I heard the select board say they did in fact get another third party. Did I mishear that, or were they saying something that wasn't true?
I don't believe so. Actually,
Okay.
I don't think. No, in fact, I'm sure they did not. Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Michelle?
you, Corey.
Yeah, so there was the third party that came in. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. I thought it was maybe someone, Clark, I don't know if it was a recommendation by you for the person, but there was the third party consultant that came in and weighed in on.
Was it Vertex?
No,
it was the architect was C3 Consultants, and they were hired on December 13th. In other words, what happened is John had decided it was an unsafe building, and then he asked for, it was a $2,000 or $3,000 expense to the town, and they hired C3 architects to provide a letter in support of his view. That's what it was. There's no other independent. That person was part of John Hallen's attempt to justify his work.
I see. Thank you.
And that consultant wrote a letter, and it said what? It affirmed John's position.
It affirmed John's position, and I think most of these issues about height and width, that's very specific stuff, which is very arcane things, came from that consultant.
So here's my soliloquy. I don't know who's a huge football fan here. Big Patriots fan, anyone? So I'm listening to this, and it reminds me of something that Robert Kraft said at one of his conferences when he was talking about Bill Belichick. And he was saying, Robert Kraft, he says one of the things when he builds his businesses, he believes in clear responsibility and clear accountability. And in this context, what we're talking about is who is accountable for declaring the building is safe. Who will be accountable for if the building does burn down? And I just went through a 3-year lawsuit, with witnesses and liability, all this kind of stuff. When something happens, the discussion we need to have is who's going to be the one paying the insurance bill, paying the claim, being brought into trial. And while I appreciate the opinions of all the members in town, and I fully believe, and especially Mr. Brewer, I've worked on a lot of stuff, all the intentions are good and are in the right place. But when it comes down to it, it's not Clark Brewer's stamp that's going on the occupancy permit. It's not Mr. Peters' stamp. They're not going to be liable for this decision. John is. If something happens in that building and we get sued, John could have criminal liability,
No,
right? I mean, he could.
no, the town does, Corey, the town does, but he will not, okay? Yeah. The
Well,
town,
he'll get called in, right? But you are not. You are not going to be testifying on behalf of the town, Mr. Dormitzer, and neither is Clark.
of
So
course.
if we can find a third party that says, yeah, this building is clear, and if something happens, yeah, it's on us. Okay, but other than that, a lot of this is, I don't want to call it hearsay, but we're not the ones who are accountable here. None of our opinions really matter when it comes to the accountability tree. I think we should encourage John to make the right call, but it's ultimately he's the one who's accountable here. And all the other things, unless we can find a way to move that accountability to somewhere else, a different, architectural firm, a different safety firm, whatever, the rest of it kind of isn't pertinent. It's still his call.
May I add something, and really again to remember, it was stamped occupiable. It would not have been occupiable otherwise. So what he did, he decided it was not occupiable. So it's really quite an important distinction here.
No, I understand, but it's still him who is accountable. So, I've heard a lot of different versions of the story of how he got here. I don't want to spend time in a public meeting going through all the different versions of that. I also agree that a reasonable person could have reasonable concerns. But if I'm trying to look through all of the chaff, all of the noise, I'm left with who's accountable for the safety of the building, whose call is it if something happens, and it's going to be John. And unless we can get some other firm to undo John and say, nope, we approve this building for occupancy, we approve all this kind of stuff after what's all happened, because Ralph, as you said, what happened, right? And that's just where we are. If we can find someone to say, no, that's not right, and they take responsibility, I'm for it, but we're not the ones, we're not accountable here. So we can have all the opinions we want, but ultimately it's going to be John who is the only one who's accountable in this thing. So that's the only thing to me that matters, is who is accountable if something happens in this building, where's the liability, who's going to be called in to testify, and it's all these other opinions don't matter in that case. That's just how I'm seeing it.
Yeah, you're not wrong. We do need a third party. I don't disagree at all. I think we need a third party. I totally agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's terribly regrettable what's happened here, and but the very words he put there are so dangerous for the town. The liability, he will not suffer that. The town would suffer it. They would be liable here. There's no doubt about that. But he's created the situation where that liability now exists, and that's real. In fact, it exists today. That's a real problem. Yeah.
I just want to point out that Peter Longley has been putting comments into the Q&A, and he notes that Mr. Hallam is not legally responsible. He's indemnified by the code, and that Brett Donham, the architect, was liable in 1987.
Is he, well, again, none of us are lawyers, but is he indemnified by a code which he applies incorrectly? Right. I mean, if John says, yeah, I approve this, but it's in violation of interpretation of the code, this is what I'm saying. I mean, so John could be called in, and this is why lawyers are paid, because legal questions are hard. So that's.
If there was a code violation in 1987, they had 45 days at that time to appeal his occupancy permit, as it turns out. So if there was an opportunity to say it was not code compliant, it was within that 45-day period or a similar period after the building was actually declared being suitable for occupancy by the then building inspector. So that's what happened. And someone can remember the name of the building inspector. It's and I don't remember the name, but there was a town building inspector. So.
Corey, I've got my hand up because I don't want to steal your line of questioning, but we're making an assumption that a building occupancy permit was issued in the 1980s. Do we know for a fact that it was? Because this would not be the first building that got occupied without an occupancy permit.
The only way I could say that would be to read the letter from Brett Donham, in which he asserts it was done. Note there is no other a person alive, oddly enough. And we searched around to find people on the town hall building committee. We tried everything to try to get a single other person. We could not find anyone, but he lives and wrote a quite detailed letter on this whole question. So,
and it states that he's virtually certain that, in fact, one was issued.
yes, he is virtually certain, more than virtually certain. He said he would have been sued had he been wrong. So yes. Right. And it was,
Yeah,
it seemed,
just,
it seemed so conclusive to me, but nobody else wanted to accept that. But
it does. But the reason I'm sort of perplexed is because I actually, own a home, not in Cohasset, but I own a home that was never issued an occupancy permit after an extensive renovation.
that's interesting. How'd you get away with that?
Totally seriously. In fact, there's an entire generation from that time where the building inspector just didn't bother to finish them.
Oh my goodness, that's not
all
good.
over town.
That's not terrific. All right.
So this question. My question may sound silly, but it's really on our building inspector to not let anyone in the building until the occupancy permit is issued. Right.
That's correct. Yeah.
And it would be the first time that he let people that a building inspector let people in without actually doing an occupancy permit and checking it off and signing it. That's why I asked.
I wish
Ralph,
we were living. If we had a living body, we could find that out. We don't.
So you've searched and we can't find a file on this. Is that accurate?
Nothing. Oh, and I tell you, we have gone through, I'd say, 200 of the boxes in the basement. We went through every single one of the drawings that existed for it, and there is nothing. The only place I haven't gone, and I don't know if they'll let me do it now, is I know there's something up in the attic. If there's a you look at the drawing, you'll see, and I've been up there one time. There's a stairway that goes up into the attic of the old building that was loaded with drawings and materials, and I haven't been up there in about 20 years. But anyway, I wonder if anyone's ever gone up there. And there was a lot of stuff up there, just sitting up there, lying around. But I don't know. If you want to go find that that particular place, look on the drawing that you got from Clark Brewer and look across from the assessor's office. You'll see the last office before you come to, I guess, the assembly room down, or the conference room. The last office, you'll see there's a stairway there, and that goes up into the attic. And there was piles of stuff up there.
Yeah, there's kind of a full room there above the projector room, almost like an intermediate level before you actually went up into the roof. But
I just haven't decided I should go up there.
Yeah, Michelle's got her hand up. I think
there's nothing left in that room. There's nothing in that room.
Okay.
All of those records were consolidated, and those now live either in the basement or where record storage is in the library and 135 King Street.
Well, that's interesting. Oh, so there are
It's
other
all
places.
been archived. The town clerk has all the records of all the files that were archived from that room.
Okay, she showed us, she gave us her entire list, and she checked everyone off, and she had us look at every box where there was a potential reference. She was great on it. Terrific. Yeah.
So Rob, you were able to find plans. You just weren't able to, for the project. You just weren't able to find a building permit, or sorry, an occupancy permit.
That's correct. There are very detailed plans, and we have several copies of it. Yeah, but
okay,
but no occupancies. Right. Yeah.
And it's not in the building department, which would be the obvious place to start.
He gave me his entire file. John was perfectly generous. Gave me his entire file, and none of it wasn't in any of his files either. Yeah. Right.
It sort of doesn't matter, though. I mean, we have a document from our building inspector declaring the building as it was.
Yeah.
I mean, if something goes wrong, that's getting up there, and whoever's liable is liable. The town will be liable for an enormous amount of money. In a jury trial or something with that document there, and us going, well, too bad, stay in there anyway. So these are just the facts, right? So they're, again, and I agree with Ralph. I mean, if there's a possibility to get a third party to come in and say, no, we got no problem with this, that helps. But yeah, I think the genie's out of the bottle here. And even if occupancy permit or no, we have an official document that is live in public.
Yeah. So let me ask
Peter.
The only thing I would argue is that John has given you a way out, and And the question is whether you take it at 25,000 or 35,
Yeah.
25,800 or
Yeah.
30,000.
That's the bottom line.
That's the out. Okay. He's
Yeah.
saying that's okay if you do that. So that's your out.
So,
And that's-
so that is certainly an out with regards to the annex. Let me
It
ask
should
you a
be- that
question.
should be done. Yeah.
I've heard the code designation and the the protected materials status cited as reasons why Old Town Hall should still be compliant, and why Howland's letter was erroneous on that front. So I've heard that articulated now several times to me privately, in the select board meeting publicly, now in this committee publicly. Has that ever has the analysis that the two of you and Mr. Longley and Mr. Brewer did to reach that conclusion, has that ever been written explicitly as to what you believe Howland got wrong, and and sent to the town and to Mr. Howland, as a direct appeal, as opposed to
Yes.
an appeal to some third venue, right?
Yes.
Yes.
In the last select board meeting, he presented that as a written document. Yes. Right. To the select board. Right.
Who presented it?
Peter Longley. He presented it to Gene Dipple. Sorry. Yeah, Gene.
Okay, and this was as he was presenting it orally, or did he present it in advance?
He gave it to them in advance, and he also did it orally. He did both. Right.
Okay, because look, as a practical matter, what this is really just a code citation issue, right? And it just strikes me that Mr. Longley, Mr. Brewer, and Mr. Howland and this gentleman from C3, frankly, should sit down with the code and point to the different sections and have a conversation about it and try to convince each other, that one of them got it wrong, right? And see what comes of that. I mean, that would be a logical conversation, would it? As opposed to hiring a third party, because, look, if I do
tried already.
If I do 2 + 2 and I say it's 5, right? And you guys do 2 + 2 and say it's 4. Well, why don't we compare our math, right?
Well, you're just too rational.
Well, that maybe.
I totally agree with your thinking.
I mean, what I hear is basically oral arguments back and forth without sort of mediation, or without an actual conversation to try and settle the issue directly between the experts.
I
right?
don't disagree. I think it is the way to do it, but at one level it was tried, and it really didn't work well. But I don't disagree. It should be resolved between experts of code. I totally.
I mean, I think there should be a conversation with a closed door, because this public debate where people are going to get dug in and feel they're on the hot seat, it's just not productive. And look, if John comes out of that meeting and says, no, my analysis stands, I disagree with what you're standing. I've heard your arguments. We've looked at the code, and this is my opinion, and I stand by it. Right? We're that's where we are.
We brought that request to the select board. The select board is just not interested. The select board is focused on moving folks out of 41 Highland Avenue and into one of those two buildings that responded to RFPs. And if the select board could be persuaded to, before we start spending large sums of money, could be persuaded to just have another serious, sober analysis of whether or not 41 Highland Avenue and its two component buildings require abandonment or not, before we spend all this money on moving out of there. And that's why I'm so hot. And that's why Ralph and myself have been meeting with Peter and Clark to try and prevent unnecessary spending of town funds.
Is it common knowledge? Is it safe to say that it's clear that 41 Highland needs extensive work.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Okay. So I'm just wondering if, the conversation really is, how do we most effectively get that work done, which may include moving people out of that building so that we can work on that building.
Mhm.
That may be part of the plan, right? I'm just wondering if
I'd go further, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, but it will include it. There's no way to do any meaningful renovations or repairs on that building while it's occupied. It's not fair to the staff. It's not fair to the contractors. It'll take twice as long to work around the staff, and that'll
more
drive
money,
the price. So, I'm very interested in getting to the bottom of this code issue. I truly am, and I would like, everyone to either, to review each other's work and either agree or disagree and see if we can actually get to a resolution on it. But I prefaced all this by saying, there is a common thread through all of these
that's what
scenarios, and that is sooner or later, everybody's coming out of that building.
That was kind of my question.
For some meaningful period of time, whether it's 2 years, 4 years.
Right. And all these other things, I don't want to say are academic, but they're important. But when it comes to the actual physical, where our feet moving, it may not actually matter that much. Right. I mean, if we're considering moving people out, I think in the context of what lease term we choose and how much we outfit the building, those are the questions that we'll get into. But the idea of moving out of that building, I think it's fair to assume it's a given at this point.
Out of which building, Corey?
Out of 41 Highland, for the purposes of renovation, if that is even the most cost-effective option.
Are you talking
leaving
about
that building.
the annex as well? Because
Both.
the annex is much different than the 1857 building. The annex is sprinklered. It's alarmed. Yes, there's a roof that needs to be repaired, but that doesn't require moving people out. You do need to move people out of 1857 historic town hall. Yes, but the 1987 annex, I don't believe that. Now, I'm
hearing
myself and I'm repeating myself, and I should probably just stop. And to everyone's relief, but I feel very strongly about this, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at what, even if we're doing a minor renovation, I mean, I don't know who's lived through a renovation here. I mean, we probably all have gone through a home renovation. I didn't live through mine. I moved to a different building, right? At minimum, we're talking a year of work to just kind of get stuff back together. So we're moving people. No matter what we do, we're moving people. I don't see a version of this where we aren't moving people. I mean, in the next couple of years, if we're doing any meaningful work to 41 Highland to preserve it, it's just not logistically possible.
Can I interject that it is 8:30, and I love to keep going. Probably my ability to stay going here is going to be limited. Do you mind going to 41 Highland Ave new building proposal, which is on our list here, or do you want to stay where we are? Because we may be we're not reaching a conclusion of any kind right now. So I'm just trying to say, could we move it so that I assume we'll have a continuance of this meeting, and we'll try to get at this whole thing once we have a lot more material from Michelle in the future. But are people okay with that? Just move to 41 Highland building.
So you want to stay 41 Highland to our continued meeting, or you want to cover it right now?
I think at least get a brief now, but not a huge amount of time spent, but at least enough so everybody understands what the proposal is. That would be useful for everybody, because it might become a discussion point as to what you really want to do. Do you want to move there at some future time, or move to 1 Highland Ave, or stay in 41 Highland Ave Annex? What do you want to do? So you need to see it as a proposal. But I think it's getting late. And
it is. I mean, I leave it to the committee. If people are willing to spend 15 minutes on this, I'm willing to, but I'm not going to force people to stay.
Was it part of the RFP?
No,
it was
yes.
not.
Oh, yes, it was. It was sent in as part of the RFP.
Well, I understand, but it does not.
It wasn't a 5-year
to
lease
an
proposal.
immediate need for temporary space.
It was. He considered it responsive to the broader question. That's exactly right.
Okay.
And to that point, I think we're mixing apples and oranges here, right? There's
Yeah, I
a
agree.
situation that we're trying to address that needs our immediate attention. A new building in the back of 41 Highland, that's a long-term solution, and I don't think that's where we're at yet. That's a bigger discussion. I think we're just trying to figure out, do we need to move people in the immediate,
Right.
Immediately or
The only
near.
reason the only reason I raised it is on the agenda, so you can take it off the
Fair.
agenda. It's
That's
on the
Yeah,
fair.
no,
agenda.
look, I
That's
put it on
fair.
the
That's
agenda
fair.
because I wanted everyone to have all these topics to have an opportunity to be discussed. I mean, if it wasn't on the agenda, we'd probably hear about it. So I do think we touch on it at some point. The question is, do people feel a need to discuss it tonight, or do you want to touch on it in a continued meeting?
I prefer
agree
to
with
go
Francine.
to continued meeting.
I agree with
You'd
Mike.
like to defer it to a continued meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Corey.
What is-
Yeah, I mean, if it's still relevant, I'm trying to understand where that fits in. I mean, I understand it's part of the broader conversation, but we can't get lost in the broad conversation with what's in front of us today. We have to make a call of some sort, and we have to. So I'd rather trim our conversation to be vote. If the proposal is to lease a building and that's going to be the request in front of us, I want to arm that up as much as possible. And I don't necessarily think this a whole separate proposal helps me do that very much.
I agree.
Okay. Would people like it on the next agenda or not at all? I mean, I'm happy to spend 15 minutes or as much time as it needs. I don't think it's a long conversation given what people are saying here, which is it doesn't address our current need. So I think it can be a very short conversation. I don't want to just simply exclude it from this discussion. I also, to your point, Corey, don't want to go down a rabbit hole that doesn't, address the issue in front of us, the immediate issue.
Let me interject here. Why is it important here? I've had a conversation with a couple of the select people on this, and the general feeling is this is a cart before the horse kind of question. You really need to have some agreement on what, in fact, might be the long-term solution, whether it is 41 Highland Ave Annex renovated, 41 Highland Ave behind the parking lot, or 1 Pleasant Street. You need that conversation so that you can actually say, how long do you want the employees to be leaving the current building, or when do they leave? So it's all part of the same conversation. So, and that is, most people think that's the way to look at this thing. At some point, you need the discussion. I'm not arguing for it tonight. I'm only saying do not discount all of this without thinking of the total possible choices that you might make going forward. That's all.
But
I think we should think of them. I think there's no way we're going to choose one anytime, even remotely soon.
It's also kind of not our call, right? I mean, we are downstream from select board. I mean, we can vote whatever the hell we want, but the select board's not. If the select board's not going to create an article to do this, then we're kind of wasting our time,
okay,
right? So
let me give one other context of this, and this is why there's so much concern about all of it. Depending on what let's assume that in fact we actually need to move the employees out, irrespective of when you do it, but you have to do it. And given the fact that 1 Pleasant Street appears to be one of the more viable solutions, okay, the risk is, given the cost of going there, the fitting out of that building means that given the option to purchase the building makes it the desirable long-term option without having even given consideration for other options. So the risk long-term is never to move out of that building unless you just hate it, because in fact it's much cheaper to stay there, and therefore you haven't considered the other options. And that's the underlying fear, that we have circumvented the vote of the public by simply creating a lease situation,
Right.
moving into a purchase situation, which in fact would feel very, very serious interference with the ballot vote. So that's
okay. Let's just go ahead and put this on the agenda, the next agenda. We need to capture it in a limited period of time. I just want to be completely clear. Nobody can purchase 1 Pleasant or anything else without taking it to town meeting, right?
Correct.
Whether it's an option embedded in a lease or not, it does not matter. So, we as a committee would discuss all the options that we could imagine at that moment and make a recommendation if that, if the select board ever chose to move forward on a purchase of One Pleasant, right? But I'm happy to take the step to establish the record that we reviewed this now, if that's just simply to have done, just simply better to have done. Unless other people wildly disagree. I mean, I put it on this agenda because I wanted everyone to have a fair hearing on these issues.
It's just a matter of when, I think, quite frankly.
Yeah,
it's getting late, so it's when.
Yeah.
It sounds like
I
people
don't-
are out of gas tonight.
Yeah.
So when would this committee like to next meet? Do you want to do it a week from today, next Monday?
Sure.
Or is there a sense of urgency that we should do it later this week?
It's a holiday.
That's a
Monday's a
holiday.
holiday.
Oh, that's a holiday. Okay.
Yeah.
And we also get into school vacations if that affects anyone. So
That's
Corey,
next week.
please.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we want to move it to Tuesday, or do we want to meet later this week? I don't know if Michelle can even have, more data to us in time to meet on, say, a Thursday night, but
Well, so our building's not open tomorrow, so I can't post tomorrow for Thursday. So that poses
okay.
the
So that's
challenge.
off the table. So and Monday is a holiday, so the earliest we could meet is Tuesday. Corey, what's the best day for you next week, recognizing that some people can't do later in the week? Most of our committee members indicated that sort of Monday through Wednesday is pretty good. You're on mute. And I'm just asking Corey because he's got a school-age kid, and I'm sure they've got vacation plans.
Can you hear me
next
now?
week.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, my AirPods died. Yeah, and so I'm alone with both my kids all week next week. So I mean, unless people want to get on a meeting at 8 o'clock after I get them to bed and showered and bathed and stuff, I'm pretty. Or we can have them on. If we can make them voting members if you want. I mean, my 4-year-old daughter has opinions, and she will let you know. So
It'll just dilute your vote. We'll give you, your one vote can be split to 3.
it's totally fine.
Does that mean there is literally no time that works, Corey?
I would prefer not. But if again, I guess my question is, what is the time deadline that we need to decide this for? I guess it's annual town meeting.
It's town meeting. I mean, I think.
Well, and it does seem like there's a lot of things that are moving really quickly. Michelle, is that kind of true? It sounds like there's rapid succession. We're trying to figure out code. We're trying to figure out this. We're trying to figure out that. Does not scheduling a meeting immediately kind of give some more time for those things to simmer?
So yes, and maybe I can throw out a suggestion. There are other capital items that you could tackle, that maybe Corey, you could review in advance, like police. Usually it's a car, maybe there's some easier capital items that you could get through, that maybe you could just provide, your opinion on without having the entire meeting, but at least tackle some of the other capital items so we don't fall so far behind.
Okay, Michelle, if you've got stuff ready to go, I'll work with you to schedule a meeting for next week, and we'll start to knock some things out. But it's important that we do have a meeting as a committee with Corey, just to set liaisons, committee structure, understand the big picture in terms of how much money we have to work with and the overall request list before we get too far down the path of reviewing individual requests. But if there's some straightforward ones, I'm amenable to just starting that next week in Corey's absence.
And
Yeah, I
Corey,
mean,
how do you feel about that?
I'll hop on as soon as I can. I mean, so, basically, I mean, I'll try my best to get on at 7. Depends obviously on how people behave. My kids are really well behaved. So, I can probably hop on, 7:15, one day, one of the days.
I'm just saying, let's not tackle town hall knowing
Yeah.
Corey has
Sure.
time.
I'd appreciate it.
Correct. We're going to push town hall 2 weeks.
Okay. And hopefully we'll get more answers on the nuances of code and liability and stuff.
And all the other items you asked for. So I'll be able to provide
All those costs. Yes, please.
Yep.
That's huge.
Yep.
Perfect.
And I will upload all of the capital things that I have so you can start reviewing them. And then, as a committee, you can decide, maybe it's best not to meet without Corey, or you'll decide as a committee, but I'll upload all the documents.
Let's talk tomorrow, Michelle, and figure out what's actually ready to go for next week.
Okay.
And Corey, is Tuesday the better day or is a different day?
Next week, it doesn't really matter.
Doesn't matter. All equally bad. Does anyone else have any conflicts next week, given it's not taking place Monday? Okay.
Yeah, the 21st would be probably problematic for me.
Which day is that?
I think it's Wednesday.
Wednesday.
So,
yeah.
okay, so if we do it,
Yeah.
we shoot for Tuesday. Okay. All right, Michelle, let's chat tomorrow.
Sounds good.
Okay. And
I did send out that one set of minutes. If I don't know if I know they were late. Sorry, I thought I'd send them earlier after our meeting, but maybe.
what I'd like to suggest, given the hour, unless everybody says they reviewed them right now, I'd like to suggest we defer those along with everything else. Has everybody reviewed them?
I have, but
You have. I have as well.
I'm happy to wrap this up now.
Okay, let's just defer that to the next meeting. And with that, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Great. Roll call vote. Francine Lyons,
Francine Lyons, aye.
Corey Evans,
Corey Evans, aye.
Michael Dick,
Mike Dick, aye.
Susan Franklin,
Susan Franklin, aye.
Brian Host, aye. Ralph, give us a thumbs up. All right.
Okay.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you all.